William Oliver Taylor served as a private in Company A of the 7th Cavalry Regiment in the United States Army. He is well known for his survival of the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, during which the 7th Cavalry Regiment was decisively defeated by a coalition of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho forces. Taylor was among the few soldiers who escaped the battlefield and made his way back to the river, where he was eventually rescued by the steamer Far West. He was one of the survivors who boarded the vessel and reached safety. Taylor's first-hand account of the battle in 1876 is considered one of the most comprehensive and precise narratives of the event. Historians have studied it extensively, and it continues to serve as an essential primary source regarding the Battle of Little Bighorn. Before we begin, we kindly ask you to support our community by liking and subscribing to our channel. The march on June 24, 1876, proved to be quite taxing, as we halted several times to allow the scouts to thoroughly survey the valley ahead. After feeding and calming our horses, the men set up their shelter tents and blankets on the ground, taking a much-needed rest following a simple meal of coffee and hardtack. The site we chose for our encampment was one of the most breathtaking we had ever encountered. A clear, refreshing creek meandered between the river and the steep hill to our right, which rose almost vertically for a short distance. A flat, grassy plateau, approximately 200 yards wide, extended from the bluff. The picturesque landscape was further enhanced by an abundance of blooming wild rose bushes and scattered trees across the level ground. With its low willows and fragrant roses, it was easy to see why the river was named as it was. This location was so ideal for camping that Custer often selected sites of exceptional natural beauty whenever possible. It seemed fitting that the site of what would ultimately become the last camp for so many individuals should possess such beauty. Since that time, I often find myself wishing that the location could be rediscovered and photographed. My troop was stationed quite near Custer's headquarters, where he sat alone for an extended period, seemingly lost in contemplation. As I lay on my side facing him, I observed a sorrowful expression on his face that was unfamiliar to me, perhaps accentuated by the approaching twilight. Was he reminiscing about Fort Lincoln, the place he had left his wife? Did he harbor a sense of foreboding about the challenges that awaited him the following day? His reverie was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of other officers at his tent, seeking specific directives. As the meeting concluded, a small group of younger officers lingered near the bivouac of one of their comrades. Soon the words of Annie Laurie reached my ears, delivered in a slow, mournful tone, accompanied by soft, gentle footsteps, a farewell to the doors, and ultimately the doxology, praising God from whom all blessings flow. Was it not peculiar for cavalrymen to sing such a song on an Indian trail? Many of those young officers had recently graduated from West Point. Could it not have been a heartfelt prayer? Might it have emerged from an unconscious premonition of the grim fate that awaited many of them? Yet as the final notes faded, they seemed to shake off their somber feelings, adding, "He's a jolly good fellow that nobody can deny." At the time, I considered that sentiment rather irreverent. However, soldiers are not typically recognized for their piety. After enjoying a few pleasant evenings together, they sought rest. The camp was remarkably tranquil, occasionally interrupted by the calls of night birds or the sound of a horse's hooves. As we rested in that peaceful and picturesque bivouac, situated in a part of the Indians' paradise we had never explored before, it was hard to believe that just a week prior, a fierce battle had unfolded nearby, where Crazy Horse had successfully thwarted General Crook's advance with a significantly larger force than ours. Even the most imaginative minds could not have foreseen that within a month, the very enemy forces we were pursuing, emboldened by another substantial victory, would once again be encamped along this same stream, only to be quickly scattered by General Terry's approach from the north, following the route we had just traversed, and General Crook's return from the south along the river. After encircling a considerable portion of the nation, our commanders would return to this site to continue the pursuit of the hostile forces we were currently tracking. The brave and undefeated Lame Deer would soon give his life for the honor of living and hunting by this rose-fringed stream just a few kilometers from our camp, and his name would be etched in the history of his tribe for generations. Our rest was brief, as we were awakened around 10 o'clock and instructed to prepare for a night march. We quickly mounted our horses and rode at least 10 miles up the North Fork of the river, navigating the divide between the Rosebud and the Little Bighorn, while continuing to follow the Rosebud. We paused around 2 in the morning to await updates from the scouts sent to locate the Indian camp, if possible. Many soldiers seized the chance to rest while the saddles were removed. As dawn broke, coffee was brewed, but the quality of the water made it unpleasant to drink. Those who wished to stay awake formed small groups to discuss the potential for a confrontation and to distance themselves from the incessant sound of the pipe. Shortly before 8 o'clock, General Custer rode without a saddle, and I believe without a hat, to visit the various troops, informing the officers that the Indians had been located. General Custer proceeded to the vantage point on the divide where scouts had reported seeing smoke rising from the Indian village and the pony herds grazing in the nearby valley, approximately 12 to 15 miles away, and announced that the order would be executed without delay. Once the men were mounted, we began our ascent up the divide between the Rosebud and Little Bighorn rivers. We did not halt until around 10:30 a.m., when we took cover in a ravine, roughly 4 or 5 miles from the summit of the divide. At this location, we were instructed to remain concealed and silent. Captain Godfrey reported that Custer had indicated a plan to wait until the next morning to initiate an attack. However, due to indications from the scouts and others that our presence had been detected, we were compelled to act swiftly and began crossing the divide again just before noon. Shortly thereafter, the regiment was divided into battalions. The advance battalion, led by Major Reno, consisted of Troop M under Captain French, Troop A commanded by Captain Dillon and Lieutenant DeRudio, and Troop G led by Lieutenants McIntosh and Wallace. Additionally, there were 30 Indian scouts under the command of Lieutenants Varnum and Hare. 2 translators were present, Frank Gerard of mixed heritage and Isaiah Dorman, an African American. The battalion also comprised 3 white scouts, Barandot, George Herendeen, and Charlie Reynolds. Additionally, there were 2 medical officers, doctors, Porter and DeWolf. While the exact number of personnel in the battalion remains uncertain, it likely numbered just under 150. To our right was General Custer's battalion, which included Troops C, E, F, J, and L, while Captain Bentine's battalion, consisting of approximately 125 men from Troops D, H, and K, moved to our left front. The pack trains followed behind, accompanied by B Troop and Captain McDougal. Major Reno's regiment advanced along the Indian Trail down a valley that was crossed by Bentine's or Sundance Creek, a stream that, when it contained water, flowed into the Little Bighorn River. At that moment, however, it was dry. As we marched, we passed a burial tent containing the body of a warrior that our Indian scouts had burned. It was later revealed that the warrior had died 8 days prior, on June 17th, during the battle with Crook at Rosebud. He was the brother of Circling Bear, also known as Old She-Bear. Despite reports of some Indians being in the vicinity, I did not observe any, although they were said to be moving at a safe distance. We soon arrived at the Little Bighorn, a stream measuring between 50 and 70 feet wide and 2 to 4 feet deep, with clear, icy cold water. As we approached the river, Reno issued an order that prompted us to quicken our pace. Both horses and riders eagerly plunged into the river to satisfy their thirst. I removed my hat, fashioned the brim into a scoop, and leaned over to fill it with water while waiting for the horses to drink. I consumed the last drop of water I would have for over 24 arduous hours. After the horses were watered, we exited the river, traversed the thicket, and moved onto the grassland. Upon arrival, we dismounted and secured our saddle girths. We proceeded through a long, narrow valley for approximately 10 minutes. To our right, the river meandered through a densely wooded area, flanked by steep bluffs. On our left, low hills rose, revealing glimpses of pony herds. As we approached, we noticed mounted men moving in various patterns, some in circles, others advancing and retreating. They were signaling and gathering their ponies while we maintained a brisk pace. Soon the command to trot was issued. Shortly thereafter, we were ordered to charge as the sharp sound of gunfire reached our ears, accompanied by small puffs of smoke. Major Marcus Reno shouted for silence as some of our soldiers began to cheer in response to the Indians' war cries, and the command to charge resonated once more. The word charge caught my attention, prompting me to glance back. Not far behind my unit, Major Reno and Lieutenant Hodgson were riding closely together. At that moment, Major Reno raised a bottle to his lips, but Lieutenant Hodgson took it from him as I turned to look. The flask appeared to be half or two-thirds full of an amber liquid and was about the size of a rope. While this scenario was not particularly unusual, it has remained etched in my memory. I couldn't shake my concern about the contents of the flask and its potential impact on our leadership as I redirected my focus to the front. Although I cannot confirm my suspicions, I have always had a strong inclination about what it might have contained. Notably, our Native American adversaries later asserted that our soldiers exhibited signs of intoxication during the battle, with one Cheyenne warrior even claiming to have found whiskey on the bodies of our fallen comrades. Regardless, I found myself in a precarious position as we prepared to confront the enemy. I was tasked with leading 3 horses into battle as the 4th man in the count-off, which prevented me from immediately joining the conflict. Thankfully, my attempt to swap places with Cornelius Crowley, the 3rd man in our group, did not succeed. Crowley had been exhibiting signs of mental instability, which the stress of battle exacerbated. Subsequently, the stable guard monitored him closely. As we rode towards the Indian settlement, which was encircled by dense underbrush and towering cottonwood trees, the river wound its way through the plains. We navigated the rugged landscape without hesitation, our horses swiftly carrying us into the unknown. Along the line, many faces appeared resolute, some slightly pale, yet not all were filled with fear. The angel of death loomed nearby. Was he marking those who would soon be dead, stripped of their identities after an hour in the plains or woods? Regardless, no one flinched. For most of us, this was our first experience with close-quarters combat. It was challenging to remain still as a target, refraining from returning fire, all of which felt foreign and unsettling. However, our turn was approaching. The command came swiftly and decisively. "Halt!" was followed immediately by, "Prepare to engage on foot." While the other men dismounted, secured their horses, handed the bridle reins to the 4th man, and advanced to their positions in the skirmish line, the 4th man from the right remained in his saddle. 150 cavalrymen charged enthusiastically towards an Indian village defended by at least 2,500 Sioux warriors, only to dismount and fight on foot when they were close enough, leaving a quarter of their number to tend to the horses. In retrospect, the sheer audacity of such a maneuver seems almost insane. Lieutenant Hare was responsible for the lead horses, which were taken into the woods for additional protection, remaining just behind the skirmish line. Shortly thereafter, I caught sight of him dashing around and shouting, "Where's my horse? Where is my horse?" He hurried towards me, prompting me to shout back, perhaps not very politely, but with the desired effect. I directed my horse towards the path where I had seen the men go and tossed him the reins. In mere moments, I dismounted twice and remounted while chaos reigned around us. I was uncertain of my actions, possibly mimicking others who seemed to be following orders. After traveling a short distance, I glanced to my left and behind me, only to spot a large group of Native Americans on horseback galloping through the woods in our general direction, seemingly in pursuit of the men who had passed before me. At first, I assumed they were our Indian scouts, but a closer inspection quickly dispelled that notion. Armed with muskets and wielding whips, these individuals were primarily clad in combat attire, which consisted of little more than feathers and breechcloths. One individual stood out among them, a robust figure who was the closest to me. He donned an elaborate battle bonnet adorned with long feathers that encircled his head and cascaded down his back, the tips of which danced beside his ponytail. I felt a strong urge to shoot at him, but my poor aim amidst the dense trees thwarted that intention. Additionally, I refrained from taking a shot as he seemed eager to make a swift exit. Since that encounter, I have often pondered whether that individual was affiliated with the Black Moon, Gaul, or the esteemed Great Chiefs. As I continued onward, I realized the underbrush was quite thick. While navigating through it, my right stirrup became entangled, and the strap securing it to the saddle nearly tore off, rendering it useless. This situation required me to exercise great caution to maintain my balance. After traveling a short distance from our initial entry into the woods, I broke through the trees, ascended a small bank, and emerged onto the grassland in far less time than it takes to recount. The sight that greeted me was profoundly disheartening. Not long ago, we had been skillfully maneuvering through the Indians. Now, however, we found ourselves on the defensive, leaving no time for contemplation. I quickly followed the lead of the men ahead of me, each extending their right arms to fire their handguns at a line of shouting Indians. The memory of the English's narrow red line was fading, replaced by a formidable line of Sioux warriors that was rapidly forming and expanding. More and more emerged from the dust clouds, eager to charge at us troops, many of whom, like myself, had never fired a shot from horseback and were facing combat for the first time. My position and aim were compromised, as my right stirrup had become useless. Still, I attempted to shoot at the Indians directly in front of me, who seemed particularly focused on my presence. A flurry of thoughts raced through my mind amid the chaos. The likelihood of being injured or captured loomed large, and the thought of such a fate was horrifying. Consequently, I kept one of my revolver's 6 rounds as a last resort, contemplating its use on myself if necessary. However, fate had other plans. As we galloped forward, the numerous holes and mounds of the prairie dog colony we traversed made for a perilous journey. My anxiety heightened with the constant fear that my horse might stumble and throw me off. After a few moments of this harrowing ride, I reached an ancient riverbed that was about 3 or 4 feet lower than the surrounding terrain. My horse needed to make a small leap to clear the steep bank. As I steadied myself, my right hand, still clutching my handgun, instinctively grasped the pommel of my saddle. In the process, my revolver slipped from my grip and fell to the ground. I deemed it unwise to dismount and search for my weapon in the tall grass, as the Indians were closing in and could force us into the river, potentially leading to our drowning. I hurried towards the river, where I encountered a chaotic scene. The water was stained with the blood of the struggling mass of men and horses that writhed in turmoil. Upon hearing a scream of pain from his injuries, I realized that Lieutenant Hodgson was among them. I directed my horse to the right, away from the conflict, and soon found myself on the opposite bank of the river. After a challenging ascent, I managed to scale the steep incline, but my exhausted horse, Steamboat, refused to proceed any further. The poor animal, already winded and worn out, had endured the rapid pace and strenuous effort. He had been assigned to me due to a shortage of mounts and was known for the peculiar whistling sound he made while moving. As bullets whizzed past me, I dismounted and paused briefly to allow Steamboat to catch his breath. When I attempted to urge him forward, he remained stubbornly still. In my frustration, I prodded him with my carbine, but it had no effect. As my fellow soldiers rushed past, some mounted and others on foot, they guided their horses over the crest of the bluff. Being dismounted in front of hundreds of Sioux warriors felt like staring into an abyss, highlighting the gravity of our situation. In a fit of anger and disgust, I kicked a Steamboat goodbye, unslung my carbine, and began my ascent of the bluff, leaving behind the weapons of our pursuers. We were climbing a funnel-shaped mountain, narrow at the top with steep gorges on either side leading down to the river. There was no other location nearby that would have allowed for such a swift and relatively smooth climb, suggesting that Providence had guided us here. About a third of the way up, I encountered Myers, a fellow soldier known to me as Tinkerbill due to his past as a tanner's apprentice before enlisting. After walking together for a brief period, Myers suddenly collapsed face down onto the ground with a simple "oh." Regrettably, he had been shot between the left ear and the eye and was lifeless by the time I leaned over him. Fearing that I might be next, I veered to the right into the ravine and then made another turn to the left, ascending the slope in a zigzag pattern. Frank Neely, a former comrade from M Troop who was mounted on horseback, passed by me near the summit. He graciously offered me his horse, which I accepted with gratitude, feeling relieved to be back in the saddle. Although my new steed, Old Dutch, was not significantly better than my previous mount, I was thankful to have a horse beneath me. Upon reaching the top of the bluff, I continued riding and joined Reno's main command group. A few others, who had narrowly escaped, soon arrived to join us. I had often contemplated what a person might feel when faced with imminent death, and now I understood. As we traversed the valley and ascended the bluffs, we were relentlessly pursued by a frenzied group of red warriors, desperate to protect their families. Given the overwhelming number of Indians in our disorganized state, Our escape felt nothing short of miraculous. They appeared monstrous to us, but were they truly so? The Indian gunfire and pursuit abruptly ceased as we reached the summit of the bluffs, a fact for which we were genuinely thankful, even if we did not fully grasp the reason. Major Reno seemed out of sorts and unmilitary as he paced anxiously, his cap lost in the chaos, with a red handkerchief tied around his head. While the officers gathered to share their experiences, the exhausted men collapsed onto the ground. Captain Benteen soon joined us with troops H, D, and K, who had been dispatched to the left 2 hours earlier, resulting in a brief respite for us. Following both verbal and written orders, they were en route to join Custer. According to Reno's own account, this reunion with his command occurred at 2:30 p.m. He was en route to rejoin the command after retrieving a new horse from the crowded train when he encountered Trumpeter Martin, who was delivering a message to Captain Benteen. After a brief exchange, they parted ways. Prior to the onset of combat, Boston Custer returned to the command, and his body was later found alongside those of his two brothers. Once Captain Benteen's command arrived, we remained on the bluff for over 2 hours, unchallenged and still. The first sergeants from Reno's 3 troops conducted a roll call of the men present, documenting any lost government property, as well as those who were deceased, injured, or unaccounted for. Firing could be heard in the distance, indicating the general area where Custer was believed to be engaged. A frequent question arose: why were we not advancing? Although the 3 soldiers engaged in the valley felt somewhat disheartened, it did not warrant the entire command remaining idle. While several of our men had sustained injuries, none were serious enough to hinder their ability to travel with the crowded train. Given that Custer had not moved far, it was likely that all officers were aware of his ongoing battle with the Indians nearby. The sudden retreat of the formidable Indian force that had driven us from their camp could only be attributed to another actual or anticipated attack on their camp from a different direction. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, a group of 12 fellow soldiers was seen ascending the bluffs. When the command retreated, some soldiers dismounted in the woods or just outside and remained concealed until it seemed the Indians had vacated the area. They then emerged and began to follow the path taken by Reno. The company initially consisted of 14 members, but 2 opted not to attempt an escape during the day and chose to remain behind, ultimately being discovered and killed by the Indians. George Herendeen, a scout, along with 6 soldiers from G Troop, 3 from M Troop, and 2 from A Troop, formed the group that successfully escaped. During their journey, they encountered only 5 Native Americans, whom they swiftly repelled without sustaining any injuries. One of the soldiers from A Troop discovered my horse peacefully grazing where I had left him after he crossed the waist-deep river. He took the horse with him and returned it to me, mistakenly believing I was deceased. Remarkably, despite the horse being near the Indian territory for nearly 3 hours, none of my personal belongings or equipment were taken. It is important to note that, unbeknownst to the first group, another contingent of our men had also remained hidden in the woods. This second group consisted of Lieutenant DeRudio, G Troop Private Tom O'Neill, Frank Gerard, the interpreter for the Rescouts, and half-breed scout William Jackson. These 4 individuals reached our lines late on the evening of the 26th, after approximately 34 hours and several close encounters. To be continued.